I know I get to step out from behind the curtain and actually do something. So this next session, we're on the home stretch, folks. I appreciate you sticking with us all day, and I want to thank you for your time. So in this next stretch, we're going to do a little bit different kind of format. It's not quite a panel, but a little bit more of an interview with this esteemed gentleman, Praveen. So Praveen, why don't you start us out giving us a little bit of background on who you are and what you do around this joint?
Yeah, this is on.
Yeah.
I got started with, long ago, I did a PhD in AI, and then I went and worked at a small startup that was building this thing called the Knowledge Graph. Got acquired by Google in 2010, and I helped launch the Knowledge Graph, which very quickly became responsible for top 50% of top search results on Google, and then Google AI started to happen. I moved into Google AI and did a lot of work on benchmarking and evaluation. And about 6 years ago, I started working with ML Commons. I was deeply interested in data. There's a bunch of people here in this room that have collaborated with me, and it just has been a journey in data.
That is a good background. And I know some of those people that you've worked with in the past. They're sitting right over there. She's looking around right now. So let's start with why benchmarking data? Why does that matter at all? And, we've heard a lot about, this entire, event has been around this concept of benchmarking and understanding data, and obviously the premise behind ML Commons. But so why do we need better ways to measure artificial intelligence systems or AI systems?
Well, we'll keep it entertaining, right? I'll tell you my personal reason. I think at some point, the AI, movement started happening around 2012, early 2013. And I was working on a bunch of approaches that were different than neural network. So this knowledge graph, knowledge representation approach was different. And I simply couldn't believe the stuff that people were saying that these neural networks could do. And I was a skeptic, and I was critical, and that just came naturally to me. And so evaluation was a way that I could contribute to the conversation. I didn't want to become Gary Marcus and be just a naysayer complaining. And so I decided that we got to measure these things. And that's the way to productively participate in this conversation. And that is obviously true of all benchmarking. But in particular, we were working with the data that we're collecting from people, which was being used as the ground truth data for evaluating all these AI systems. And we knew that the data that we're collecting from humans had lots of reliability issues because these were subjective questions. We were asking people to say, is this sentence offensive? Does this image show the person contemplating? And these type of questions have a lot of subjectivity. And so with Chris and Laura, we started an investigation on subjectivity, and we called it Subjectivity, Ambiguity, and Disagreement, SAD. And that was what was happening with human data. And we would know, and then we would hear that on data sets where two humans disagree more than 50% of time, AI models were achieving 99% accuracy. So somehow this didn't compute. If this data, the ground truth itself, has that much gap of reliability, then what does it mean to achieve 99% accuracy on that? And then a week later, another paper would get published that would say it's 99.2% accurate. We're like, how could you even measure that, given that ground truth has reliability issues? So we became deeply skeptical of what was happening, not just with benchmarking, but with the data that was going into benchmarking. And so we started organizing workshops with titles like Evaluating Evaluation. And that led slowly to, until I met Peter, to realizing that it was about the data. So we shouldn't be evaluating these models at all. We should be evaluating the test sets. We should be evaluating the data itself.
As they say, lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? Even more prevalent these days in artificial intelligence, I'm sure. So how do you explain benchmarking to somebody or benchmarking data to somebody then. So taking this on its head and looking really truly at the foundation, that ground truth, as you said. Well, why do you need to benchmark that at all? I mean, if you're looking at reliability,
Right.
you know, where does benchmarking fit kind of in your mind within?
So we started seeing that the data that we were using to test and train these systems, they were defining the North Star. They were defining the hill that we were climbing. Like literally, we were gradient descending on this hill that was defined by this data. And so I'll give you an example. So one of the early data sets that made a lot of progress in question answering was the Stanford question answering data set and SQuAD. And SQuAD was released, I don't know at this point, 10 years ago. And it contained 1,000 questions that were generated by Mechanical Turk workers by going to Wikipedia article and highlighting a section, a sentence, or a span, and then generating a question that was answered by that span. And that was all that was in the data set. So then people came, built systems that did better and better and better until they cracked that data set. And then the winning system that could crack this SQuAD question answering data set was asked a bunch of questions on which it failed horribly. So one question was, what is Obama's favorite color? And it said with extreme high confidence, black. But there was no mention in the Wikipedia article or any news article about Obama's favorite color. What it was doing was it was identifying a color word, black, which was probably mentioned in Obama's Wikipedia article, and assuming that that was likely to be answered because all the 1,000 questions in SQuAD were answerable questions. They're questions, by definition, whose answers were there in Wikipedia. So once people started asking questions whose answers were not in Wikipedia, it just didn't work. And so by defining the data set, we defined the compass. We defined the compass to be answer those questions that are answerable from Wikipedia. Outside of that, nobody knows what will happen. And so it became clear if this AI enterprise was to be driven by chasing these benchmarks and getting better and better on that, then these benchmarks needed to have a comprehensive representation of the task at hand. And if we said that by just cracking 1,000 questions of SQuAD, we had cracked question answering, we're probably lying to ourselves, and it wouldn't scale as soon as we threw other things at it.
So in your mind, what makes a meaningful benchmark?
A meaningful benchmark would be a benchmark on which progress would be indicative of progress on the underlying task in the real world. So we take these benchmarks. So if your question answering is your benchmark, then perhaps if you're Google, then you think about, can we answer a substantial fraction of search queries that we get? And indeed, the early results from SQuAD did not convince the search leadership that could make any impact on improving search. So a good benchmark is the compass that the whole community is sharing to move in a direction. And it felt that, it's very hard, the answer of what is a good benchmark. We have to really continuously improve these benchmarks. But contributing to good benchmarks is a really high order contribution, right? It seems you can affect all the investment of dollars and grad students and GPUs, you can direct them in a better direction. And that is a high order gain of efficiency and return on investment towards where the whole field is moving. At least that's what compelled me and some of the people who are working on benchmarking. So
on that note, you mentioned 6 years ago you started working with ML Commons, and there's a little project in there called what, Dynabench maybe?
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about what Dynabench is and what it's done?
Yeah, Dynabench was an amazing thing. I should first mention Dowie Keeler, who's not here with us right now. He's leading contextual AI, a very large AI company. When he was at Meta, he was doing a project that needed the best hate speech classifier. You can guess why. And they took the best systems that were out there, but they were still not very good. And so he, borrowed this idea that was about around in the community, initially created by Panos Iperitos, where you basically tell humans to fool the models. So all the people crowdsourcing contributors, they had to say hateful things that the model will let pass as like benign. And that was the first project that Dynabench system was created for. It was created for loading up AI models, hosting containerized AI models, and letting people fool the models, contribute data points that fool the models. And at some point when Dawi left Meta, ML Commons decided to volunteer to shepherd this project. So we took over Dynabench and the upkeep, maintenance, and support of Dynabench. And over the last 6 years, there have been about 10,000 users, 2,000 models, 500,000 data points of adversarial data, red teaming data, of language models, vision models, a bunch of other systems that were collected through Dynabench, the system. There has been one Nature article. There have been multiple NeurIPS articles. There has been NeurIPS Best Paper Award on Prisma. These are all data sets that were collected using Dynabench. So it has been just this thriving community of collecting a system for collecting adversarial data.
And has there been any kind of outputs beyond the academic sphere, right, and beyond the kind of realms of, let's say, rigorous science into industry or usages, use cases within, something larger than just the sacred halls of academia?
I believe that a lot of these data sets are out there. We don't know how much they're being used by industry. I know that the initial bolus of data that was collected around hate speech is used by Meta. I know that Laura and the Google folks were involved in collecting a lot of data around image generation models that are adversarial. They can generate these offensive, problematic images like pools of blood and things like that you wouldn't want to be rendered by just jailbreaking them in certain ways. I don't know how well those are being used by
something we need to follow up on. Huh?
Yeah.
All right. So when you kind of imagine what the future ends up being here, and obviously there's some stuff you want to discuss about Dynabench, its current status, and what we're doing moving forward with it. What do you kind of envision being a Dynabench-like model in the future, right? That collaborative, engaged community of research and industry and whatever, kind of pushing this bounds forward. Do you see it something like what Mila is doing? Sorry, Shala. Yeah. Or what Laura's doing within the individual groups, like inside of AIR, inside of ML Commons, or what do you view?
I think that's a really good question, and I think it's something that we as a community need to spend some time thinking, because a lot of what we did publicly through Dynabench and ML Commons work has become de facto standard. So right now, red teaming any Gen AI model is the default evaluation that is staple of evaluation everywhere. And there are many, many companies doing red teaming data and providing it at very high cost. And so I feel that there should be a community counterpart that actually grows. For instance, earlier today, we got some interesting results on different types of adversarial sampling, adversarial testing, and how we can organize them along skills. So I feel that we should have a community resource that is not locked behind like the data sets that say Surge and Scale AI are collecting, that is available to the community. That's what Dynabench set out to do.
So would you like to talk a little bit about what we are doing collectively with Dynabench?
So we have an idea. We are going to fully open Dynabench. Dynabench, we're going to open source the Dynabench stack, the software, the UI, as well as the data that was collected using Dynabench. So I told you that there have been 500,000 data points that have been collected, 500,000 adversarial sampling data points that were collected on Dynabench. And we want people to be able to stand up their own instance of DynaBench to host a challenge, to collect data internally or externally. We are looking for some patron who would like to host a shared instance of DynaBench where other people could contribute as well. Our plan is to, over the next few weeks, is to make DynaBench completely open and completely available to the entire community.
And the hopes there with some patron, as you said, coming alongside is to continue like to your vision, to grow and develop a community that kind of engenders that idea of collaborative red teaming, if you will, collaborative building of these resources and these pools to kind of land on what the next use case could end up being, right? What's beyond red teaming in your mind, or some of these future model states, if you will.
I don't know. I think this is a really good question as well. Like, one of the things we need to do better is figure out how we can build incentives for a crowdsourced community to participate. Like, we talked about citizen science. At this point, there is a large scale AI citizen science project here of building the missing gaps, building the blind spots, building the ways that the systems can be jailbroken in a way that is not locked inside, silos, or is not super expensive. Like even for, the ML Commons AI Illuminate benchmark, we spent considerable amount of money, and that's an expensive asset that we own. I think that what is missing is a lot more methodology, because one of the things that happens in red teaming is repetition. So as soon as you figure out that, if there is a politeness jailbreak or there is a role play jailbreak, then you get many, many copies of the same kind of data. And we haven't figured out, and then the marginal value of the same kind of data is not that much, because you now know that if I issue my same request about how to make this bomb as a haiku, then I will get the answer. Now, we don't need many, many more haikus, right? At this point, we want people to give us some new pieces of information. So I think methodologically, there is more work about how to engage people in this process.
We do need a little bit more Shakespeare in this.
Yes.
I can imagine what the outputs of that would end up being.
We should test.
Anybody want to volunteer? All right. So again, so towards a more collaborative, in community, collaborative environment. And as you kind of imagine what these next cycles end up being, you're really kind of believing in this. We can develop new and better approaches to stuff that's not locked into a particular methodology, but embraces as much of that kind of interdisciplinary kind of viewpoint as possible, right? And I think David had it in his keynote this morning that the velocity of industry with the rigor of academia, right, and kind of combine those together and then create kind of a better whole for this. Your hopes and plans around DynaBench, and again, you've been so invested in this community, and again, you and I have talked prior to this, and we've certainly talked within the DynaBench community as well. If that patron saint comes alongside and builds this, how would you like to continue to stay involved in this? Is this something that you're willing to put your hat on and walk into the sunset, or you want to stick around and see what comes next?
Well, I'm holding firm ground on data, right? I've too much. You could call it passion, you could call it sunk cost, but I'm invested. I'm fully invested. I think that it is very clear that all of what's powering, right? I remember there was a very powerful sentence earlier today that AI safety is a data problem. I believe it. Not only that, I would say that AI success is a data contribution. So all along, if AI does something great, it's because of data. If AI does something terrible, it's because of data. And I think it's been undervalued. Laura and I were co-authors on a paper that was called "Everyone Wants to Do the Model Work. Nobody wants to do the data work." This paper was very successful. And at one point, Andrew Ng was holding a physical copy of this paper and waving it at talks that he was giving. It won the Best Paper Award at CHI, but it didn't really change how people thought about data. There is something about data that has continued to remain more second class than theory and models and algorithms. And it's a mystery. There is probably lots of anthropological answers that one could make about that. But it still remains that AI safety is a data problem and AI success is a data contribution. And we should just keep working on it, and eventually things will clarify enough. Like just today, there were so many, Luis presented a model of like how the data, manufacturers are, the money stops trickling to them, but goes to all the other participants in the chain. This is something that we need to fix. This is a deeper problem for the community at large. But I think that a lot of people who work on data have some deep desire to keep working on data. And hopefully, the financial and incentives will also line up, and there'll be many more people working on it. But we'll continue to work on data. So what I expect if the patron saint shows up is to rethink how to make DynaBench an even bigger resource to the community. I would be especially interested in the datasets and benchmark track, and I'd definitely be hounding every participant at that track to start considering using DynaBench or building a shared instance for the datasets and benchmark track as a starting point.
Well, I know we're going to hear a little bit from the data folks in 2 talks from now, so Neil and Rajat. But we definitely want to thank you for all your contributions. I know that DynaBench community has been a very big labor of love and passion project for ML Commons, and certainly you have played a critical role in that. So with that, we'd love to toss it out to you if there's any questions you have for Praveen at this point. I don't know if we have any runners, but just yell it out and I'll repeat it from up here. Louis.
Yeah, I think we reached out to all the people who hosted the challenges because right now the data exists in Postgres, and we can obviously export that data, but it'll be uninterpretable. So we would like it to be like one folder for each challenge with some documentation from challenge owners. Failing which, we might export the tables in such a manner that you can hydrate it, rehydrate it, and spin up an instance that matches what DynaBench looks like today with all the challenges in datasets, because DynaBench itself is the best browser for those tables. But we're still sorting this out.
Laura.
Opportunity to support yet another ML Commons effort, which is Croissant, the metadata standard, the machine metadata standard. So you might as well try to run all these data sets, create Croissant files.
That's a great idea.
Make them accessible. We have started using it at the dataset and benchmark track. So you can use some of the hosting, default hosting sites like Hugging Face, Kaggle, Dataverse, and so on, OpenML. This would be great. Another step to kind of make it more findable, at least.
That's terrific. Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Yep. Anybody else? Well, Praveen, it's been an honor. I appreciate you putting together this stuff. If there's any last kind of words of wisdom that you have to offer us, now would be the time to give it.
I think that the work on data is fun and it's important, and the data community is really fun. And I look forward to the stuff that Laura is going to talk about, which is going further on subjectivity of data that we earlier talked about, and the diversity in data. And a lot of these issues have deep implication for all of machine learning, and there's lots of opportunities here that have not even been explored. So I welcome anybody who's interested in the data that we have collected so far to start playing with it. DynaBench is yours.
There you go. DynaBench is yours.